On the Autocar show today, we drive the new Toyota Fortuner, spend time with several Jeeps, and search for India's safest young drivers.
I'm in Jakarta, Indonesia on a warm, hot, muggy day. But the car I have with me today is arguably even hotter. Toyota's all-new Fortuner. Now the Fortuner, the original car, created something of a sensation when it was launched in 2009. It was rugged, it was fantastic off-road, it was comfortable and was even used as a pseudo-luxury car. But that car today is getting a bit long in the tooth. The ride is a bit lumpy, the engine is a bit unrefined and the interiors, well, they're extremely plain. How good is this all-new car? Let's find out. Whereas the earlier Fortuner was a simple and upright SUV with rounded off corners and a wraparound rear windscreen, this new one is so rakish, it's more Lexus than Toyota. It has a really high bumper line, the grille is tilted back sharply, and the long headlamp pods with LED running lights provide the perfect contrast. Chrome bracketing has also been used to good effect. Thick bands surround the grille and they've been used around the fog lamps as well. The Fortuner, however, looks best when viewed from the side. The distinctive kick up in the window line looking really fantastic. And around the back, the wraparound rear windshield and the beautifully cut tail lamps, they work brilliantly too. The new Fortuner has a near identical wheelbase to the earlier car. But this new car is both longer and wider, and this gives it an advantage when it comes to cabin space. Just as on the outside, the interiors are all new and a big step up from the current Fortuner. What I particularly like is this collared center console with these leather bits. The steering wheel is nice, functionality is good, the plastic buttons are nice. And what I particularly like is this large and comfortable seat. It's supportive in the right places and has just the right cushioning. The increase in dimensions are clearly felt on the inside. The cabin in general feels much airier and even the all-round visibility has improved. There's also a sense of style here. There's a nice flow to the dash, there are plenty of stylized bits like the one above the glove box. And another useful bit is the information screen that sits at the center of the instrument panel. There are, however, some not so fantastically finished bits. The glove box feels cheaply put together, the fake wood near the gear lever is very plasticky, and the door pads, well, they aren't special either. Still, it's a very practical cabin with plenty of space to store things like bottles, phones and other odds and ends. And you even get conveniences like keyless go and stop start, which you didn't get on the earlier car. There's even a bit of usable luggage space in the rear with all 3 rows up. And if you need additional space, the third row seats can be folded to the sides, giving you even more room. Toyota have even improved space on the third row. It is a bit fiddly getting in. But once you're seated in the back, there's a bit more leg room, a bit more headroom, and the shoulder room is pretty good. You have your AC vent here, the center seat gets its own seat belt, cup holders here. It's pretty comfortable and you're not sat too low. Where the Fortuner is much nicer is in the back seat. There's a lot more legroom despite the fact that this car is built on the same wheelbase as the earlier Fortuner. There's a lot more thigh support, you're sat higher off the ground, the backrest is nicer. But the thing that makes the biggest difference is the fact that the ride is a bit more supple. It's a bit more comfortable, it absorbs the bumps better. Yes, it is a bit lumpy, it still is a bit lumpy because it's a body-on-frame SUV, but the overall experience sat here in the back, that's a big step ahead. But now, let's just get behind the wheel. The Fortuner has always benefited from sharing its frame with the incredibly tough Hilux pickup. And this one is even better. It's a full 20% stiffer. The new chassis has given the Fortuner an all-new sense of agility. To begin with, it's much more planted, and then it likes taking corners much better. It just turns in with a sense of confidence that you'd never had in the earlier car. And if you want, you can even push it a bit as long as you don't overstep the limits. Yes, the new Fortuner still rolls like the Titanic, and this is a bit disconcerting initially, but like that fat man who can dance, it has a fairly good sense of balance. What this new Fortuner is also much nicer at is straight line stability. It feels much more planted, is much more relaxed at high speed, and it even is nice flowing into high speed corners. Just don't need to make so many corrections or pay so much attention, and that's much better. Even the brakes are much better. I find myself braking with plenty of confidence, and they are even much nicer in traffic where you even need that bite when it comes to stopping suddenly. However, in slower moving traffic, the steering remains heavy, and this can be quite irritating, especially when you want to swap lanes. Now, powering the new Fortuner will be a new set of engines similar to the 2.4 and 2.8 diesels seen on the new Innova. And there's also a new 6-speed automatic gearbox with paddle shifters this time around, which the Innova doesn't get. The Fortuner we have with us today is the smaller 2.4-litre engine with an automatic gearbox. This two-wheel drive Fortuner is powered by a 2.4-litre engine that makes 149 bhp. And while that's good enough for most situations, cruising, generally overtaking people in the city, it does lack a bit of punch when you really put your foot down. It labors, it takes its time, and that real hit of performance you want isn't there. Idle is a bit gravelly, and though you know it isn't too loud, this clearly is a diesel. Refinement levels, however, improve as soon as you get the engine spinning a bit faster. You get a nice slug of torque around 2200 RPM, but push it above 4000 RPM and it does begin to protest a bit. And the other problem with this engine is that it's a bit unrefined, especially when you pull it hard. Get around 3500 RPM and there's a real din. Driving at a leisurely pace isn't an issue, but as soon as you want to overtake, you have to plan it in advance. What Toyota has also done is given this car paddle shifts. And while this isn't a performance car, the paddles do make it easier to use that small amount of performance this car has. The gearbox is quick, the paddles work effectively, and it is quite nice when you click down twice and get that little bit of performance to overtake someone. As on the Innova, there are 3 driving modes: Eco, Normal and Power. And for faster traffic, it's best to use the Power mode, which significantly improves the amount of grunt you have in the bottom end of this engine. Thankfully, we'll also get the more powerful 177 horsepower 2.8-litre diesel in India, and performance with that engine will be much stronger. That the new Fortuner is a big step forward, there's no doubt. It looks much more attractive on the outside, it's much more comfortable on the inside, and it still has that rugged, tough build. It isn't perfect, however. Some of the plastics on the inside aren't up to scratch, the engine is a bit unrefined, and when it comes to India, it's going to be priced at around 30 lakhs for the top spec car. Question is it better than the new Ford Endeavour? Well, that's something we can only answer when we have both cars on the same piece of road at the same time.
After this break, Jeep's 75-year history and its future.
The most iconic off-road automotive brand in the world, Jeep is all set to make an Indian debut this year. And this year also marks the 75th anniversary of the Jeep brand. To celebrate this landmark occasion, we went to Jeep's spiritual home, Moab, to get a deeper understanding of what this legendary brand is all about. We got to experience some rather unique terrain driving Jeep's 75th anniversary models. This terrain threw everything our way. However, this was hardly a challenge for the Wrangler, thanks to its big ground clearance, highly capable 4-wheel drive system and powerful 3.6-litre V6 petrol motor. Even the larger and more luxurious Grand Cherokee handled this terrain really well. And why wouldn't it, considering that nearly all of Jeep's cars are trail rated.
Now Jeep's engineers just explained to us that all these cars are trail rated. Now what this trail rating is, it's a system where they get a lot of factors into the equation and calculate a number out of 10. Now the top spec Wrangler, the Wrangler Rubicon, that is their most capable off-road car, that gets a rating of 10 for the 2-door, 9 for the 4-door. It takes into account factors like ground clearance, a breakover angle, approach angle, departure angle, water weighting, and a whole host of important stuff like articulation of the wheels, articulation of the steering, and calculates that trail rating number.
While driving the Wrangler and the Grand Cherokee was a huge highlight of Jeep's anniversary celebrations, we just couldn't resist getting our hands on a rather interesting little car from the company's lineup.
This is Jeep's latest subcompact SUV, the Renegade. And I think most of you will agree that this is a car that will make perfect sense in India. So let's take it for a quick spin and find out what it's all about. So while it is true that the Jeep Renegade is based on the Fiat 500X platform, you'll be hard pressed to believe this once you get inside the car. All the design touches are typically Jeep in every way. You have this chunky steering wheel that looks like it's come straight from the Wrangler. Even on this multimedia system, you have this typical since 1941 Jeep badge on it, and you also get a chunky handle for the passengers to hold on to when you are off-roading. When you're driving on the road, the Renegade behaves like a large hatchback, which is a very good thing. It's comfortable, the seats are spacious, it rides very well, it's very pliant over bumpy roads. But when you take this car off the road, that's when the Jeep DNA really comes through. Now when you're driving around normally, it is a front-wheel drive car. But this being a Jeep, it has to have 4-wheel drive. And the system in this car is very capable. It's got a selector here which lets you choose what sort of surface you're driving on, and then the car can adjust the torque split between the front and rear axles accordingly. And you can also lock it in 4-wheel drive mode if you need to tackle some tricky terrain. So what do we think about the Renegade? Well, for one, it has great on-road manners, and when it comes to driving out on the trails out here in Moab, it could happily keep up with Jeep's more butch off-roaders. It's a car that makes perfect sense going up against compact SUVs like the Hyundai Creta, the Renault Duster and the Ford EcoSport. But whether Jeep gets the car to India, that remains to be seen. But I for one think they really should.
When the Renegade does eventually make its way to India, we expect prices to start around 11 lakh rupees. Very sensible indeed. But what happens when Jeep decides to stop being sensible? That answer could also be found at Moab.
Now each year, Moab also plays host to the Jeep Easter Safari, which amongst other things is pretty much an excuse for the boffins at Jeep to go nuts and come up with some mad concept cars. The difference this year, however, is that we get to drive them. So if you thought the Easter concepts were only about quirky and cool, well, Jeep can do mental as well. And this is the prime example of mental, the Jeep Trailcat concept. Now it's technically a Wrangler, but it's longer, it's wider, it's taller, running huge wheels. But that's not the mental part. The mental part is what's under the hood. A 6.2 liter Hellcat Hemi motor that makes 707 horsepower. Listen to this.
Every time you float the throttle on the Trailcat, the chassis squirms, unable to handle all that power, and it bucks up violently with a massive roar from its fairly non-existent mufflers. Driving this Jeep was a truly unforgettable, if rather manic, experience. There were a whole bunch of other concepts to sample. However, one in particular looked like it was specially designed for a slightly slower pace of life.
This is the FC150 or forward control. It's actually got a body from the 1960s without really any change to it, mounted onto a chassis of a 2005 Jeep Wrangler. So underneath it's modern, but outside it's got this old school rustic charm. And Jeep has gone a long way to add a whole lot of little trinkets all the way to make it even more appealing, like this vintage duck print roof liner. Then you've got a compass, a CB radio. Now all I need to complete my getup as an American farmer is probably a hat. I don't have one, so I guess this will have to do. How you all doing?
The 75th anniversary celebrations wouldn't really be complete without sampling some of the cars responsible for putting Jeep on the map. This included the 1945 Willys Overland MP and CJ28. The military and civilian versions of what would eventually end up as the Wrangler. And starting with the 1949 Willys wagon, going through time to the 1983 Cherokee, the 1991 Grand Wagoneer, and finally to the 1993 Grand Cherokee. This proved to be the perfect history lesson about the origins of the modern day SUV.
Now 75 years is a very long time. It represents the time difference between this, the original Willys Overland, to this, Jeep's latest 75th anniversary Wrangler. Now a lot has changed in terms of technology, but the brand spirit pretty much remains the same. The spirit of adventure is still retained. And now with Jeep coming to India in the next few months, we can't wait to sample some of that adventure ourselves on our home turf.
And coming up ahead, the search for India's safest young drivers.
$1.2 million people have lost their lives in road accidents over the last decade. And if that's not grave enough, 5.3 million, now that's the size of a small country, have been injured or maimed. Well, those are shocking numbers, but it gets worse. 16 people die every hour in India from road accidents and 46 children are injured every single day. Now, these are numbers that should make everyone sit up and take notice. Well, we at Autocar have taken notice, and since 2009, we're happy to do our part by tying up with Maruti Suzuki India Limited to present the Young Driver Program. Now, this is a program that promotes safety awareness amongst young drivers. We had 41,000 contestants from all over the country vying to be safe drivers. Well, they went through a grueling online quiz, and the safest of those were then sent to 42 different cities in Maruti driving schools to go through a driving test. Well, the 30 safest drivers are here with us today at IDTR in Delhi for the grand finale. They're all winners in our eyes, but they're vying for one top honor. That honor was this, a gleaming brand new Maruti Alto 800. But to win this vehicle, the contestants would require to navigate a series of driving tests under the watchful eyes of the IDTR instructors.
we never get to drive in such situations which we do over here. So this is one of the best driving facilities I've ever seen.
When you walk through the track, it looks very easy. But when you actually drive the vehicle, you really come to know how difficult is it to actually, be a part of the young drivers and also prove that you are really, worth it.
These are the people who are just at the verge of learning driving and started driving. So in the first step itself, while their learner license is made, if we can make them aware of what are the road rules and what are the road signs and how they have to follow them and why it is important, it makes hell of a difference.
For a layman, the tests would seem as easy as pie. Speeds were slow and turns were being carefully negotiated. But on the ground, things were slightly different for the contestants, as they had to prove their mettle while being scored on over 20 parameters, including subtle ones such as the pre-driving checks they performed, their knowledge of road civility, and of course, their driving behavior. Little nuances were also checked, like which gear they were driving in and at what speed, how they started, how they stopped, and how they used their mirrors to negotiate each challenge as well.
Doing this today made me realize that if I have to go to a really cramped place and reverse my way out of it, I would probably not be able to do that.
First I was nervous, then while driving I became confident.
The zigzag curve, which we usually don't do on the regular basis, so that's what's challenging.
Fantastic experience. It's actually a better learning experience than most whatever driving schools I've attended or whatever other tests I've given.
Well, I think the most important safety feature in any car is the driver. And we can't overemphasize enough how important good driver training is, and that really is what the Maruti Autocar Young Driver program stands for.
Autocar Young Drivers 2015 drew to a close at the awards ceremony, which also served food for thought for not just the young drivers, but to all the stakeholders involved.
Any society finds it difficult to bear the loss of young people, and once they realize that they are using the roads and they have to share space with others, I mean, the young people need to set example for others.
It's extremely important for, from a policy making standpoint, one, to look at road safety as a framework and not just as an activity, because it's only when you have a framework under which you can address licensing, training, engineering, enforcement, trauma care, investigation, data collection, is when you can actually start looking at getting sustainable solutions out.
This is a wonderful initiative that we are doing together with Autocar. We get an opportunity to reach wider spectrum of people through this. What is very exciting about it is that the number of participants is increasing by the day.
As the runners-up were announced, the suspense only mounted, broken finally by a round of applause as Mohit Kumar Malik from Faridabad was crowned the winner, ending the day's proceedings on a happy note. Yet what everyone took back home was the fact that though pace of change towards safe driving is slow, it is moving in the right direction.